We have three guests: Leonard Conshaven, Global Product Lead for Google, Tristan Charvilla, VP of Design and Customer Experience for BlaBlaCar, and Chantal Botana, who is a VP for Consumer Experience at Muse. They're going to join me today to talk about frameworks. And we will go through how they've tackled defining or choosing and implementing frameworks within their teams and their business, how they worked on adoption, but also how to adapt frameworks to their benefits within their specific contexts. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you can see me okay and hear me okay. Hello, hi Tristan,
hello.
Hi Catherine. I'm actually really keen on moderating this discussion because I've been working with various frameworks over the last 8 years as product manager. I got excited about some of them and enjoyed using and implementing some of them. I felt challenges with some of them. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on this. And I would like to start the conversation by asking you to quickly introduce yourselves and also briefly ask my first question, which is why frameworks? What do they mean for you, for your teams, and for your business? Who would like to start?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm Tristan Charvilla. I'm working at BlaBlaCar, which is a carpool company, global company. My role is pretty much to connect from marketing to design. So I'm taking care of what we call the consumer experience team. So it's product design, it would be research, product marketing to the brand and the creative team. And I'm working on several frameworks, in particular, the one that we build and we're using today at BlaBlaCar.
Great, I'm Chantal Botana. I'm the VP of Product Management at Muse. We are reimagining the art of hospitality. So we have a property management system and we deliver remarkable experiences to guests. And I have about 20 years of product management experiences. So back in the day of true waterfall, which we haven't quite gotten rid of yet either. So frameworks for me, I think Rory Madden said it best in his earlier way of working session, which is constraints enable autonomy. So I consider a framework as a form of a constraint, but a good constraint that enables the teams to have more autonomy.
Yeah, and I'm Leo. I work at Google as a global product lead, leading our search partner business and a couple of ads UI teams as well. Have a lot of fun doing that, of course, from Norway, being remote. I could really feel what Aid was talking about. So that was great. I think frameworks, of course, agree on being a constraint, but I think frameworks is most of all for me as a structure. It's a way for us to agree on what's the process, what are the steps, what's the next thing we should do. If you're a junior member of the team or if you're a senior member of the team, you still abide by the same kind of rules. So it's like football. It wouldn't make sense if people could start using their hands and whatnot on the court. So having a common set of rules really help you apply and move faster, in my take.
Thank you. So I take on from here that whether you see them as constraints or a set of rules, it's about giving this structure that enable teams to do their jobs best or to be efficient. Regarding this structure and these processes and let's say not necessarily rules, but the structure, when should you apply what type of framework? When do you know what type of framework is needed for a specific step in product development for a specific stage of the team? How do you choose that? Tristan, would you like to start?
Yes, so I would say that it depends on the problem you want to solve, basically. I think framework, you can apply framework in many different fields. Back to the definition Leo and Chantal just gave, I mean, it's a structure, right? So you're going to structure the activity, but there could be hiring frameworks, that could be personal development framework, there could be team collaboration framework or delivery framework. And probably there's no framework that is covering all those aspects. So probably first thing is to identify where is there something that you want to improve, maybe to fix or to improve. And then based on that, figuring out, okay, what type of framework do we have in the market, or what type of framework can we build. That will be also very influenced by the type of problem you want to fix or the type of dynamic you have within the team.
Chantal, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, no, I would second that. I think that it depends is always a good answer, although that sometimes frustrates people, right? Actually, an agile coach said earlier to me today that if your agile coach doesn't say it depends often enough, then they're not actually an agile coach. So I think that's very true. There's a ton of frameworks, and it really does depend. Are you doing discovery? Are you doing delivery? Are you doing discovery on the delivery? Are you doing discovery on the research on the initial problem? So there's so many out there, and I think it also depends on how much time you have too, because certain frameworks require more time than others. But certainly we're talking about like agile, lean, and design thinking frameworks.
What about you, Leonard?
Yeah, I of course very much agree with both statements. I think the more bigger question would be, when should you not apply? I think a framework. I think that's much more of the real question to think about the outcome, be very clear on what you want to accomplish, and then pick something that works in your organization. Every organization is different, and you notice that when you join a company. Typically, you don't notice it when you're in a company, because then that's just the way it is. But I really love whenever we get new team members on my team. I love spending time deep diving into their thoughts on, hey, what are we actually doing? What's not really working? So getting that feedback and checking yourself on the framework you're delivering is I think is the best way to figure out when not to apply them and to apply them.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting take on this. I totally agree. Sometimes it's important to look at when not to apply a framework just for the sake of applying a framework. We mentioned there are different types of framework. We've had this previous conversation where you mentioned, Leonard, there are so many frameworks out there. Chantal, you said the same thing just now. What do you feel about using and adapting existing frameworks versus designing your own new frameworks within the team or within the company? Leonard?
Yeah, I think it's so I made my own framework, so that kind of tells you which boat I'm in. But at the same time, it's typically an evolution of something else, right? There's no new frameworks coming. Even you claim you make something, it's not a new one. It's basically you take something and you adapt it and you keep adapting it. And just like my framework, which I kind of brought to the world a year ago, is something that's been changing along the way, right? As you get more input, get more feedback from people, you don't have to look at it. Wait, does this make sense? Does it make sense in this case? And then developing, right? So that's why now it's turning into this 3-part article series that I've written on LinkedIn, just to kind of clarify some of the points which weren't as clear in the first part. So this is how you kind of see them develop. I would argue you start by adapting what works, because there's so many benefits of a really well thought through framework that you can apply and other people know and can share experiences from, which I think is the best part of this part of that. And secondly, you from there develop it enough until it becomes your thing. So just like a product development, by the way, just like how you do build products as well. So
you talked about adapting. So you start by adapting something that exists. When and how do you do that?
For my part, is when I see something not working, right? When I see a framework or the process isn't working as smoothly as we catch something that's why are we doing this step when we shouldn't be doing it? So in product discovery, do you have to follow like a strict process, or could you jump steps when you kind of know the answers, or there's already a robust set of data you can just pull on? So sometimes you don't have to go through all the steps, even though when you do have time, you want to go through them. So that's just one example of where you can do that. There's tons of other. I think I've talked about product excellence as well at Google, which is something we work really heavily on. And with that, there is obviously steps you can skip, because if you follow everything, you will never get any product out in any sort of time frame.
I like that. I think on the flip side of that, it's always a hot topic with frameworks. Should you use them as the way they were intended? I mean, I feel like if you have a really high performing team and it's a mature team, then sure, they should be able to decide what they're going to do, Scrum, Kanban, XP, or if it's on the discovery side earlier on in the process, they should be able to decide as well. Again, the frameworks are there to help make the teams more successful and take some of the maybe tedious thinking out of the process so that they can focus on more important things. But I do think that there is a risk in taking a framework and trying to make it your own before you've reaped the benefits of it. And for a relatively, maybe it's a new team, right? So if you think back to like Bruce Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, and performing, maybe the team needs to gel a little bit, get to be high performing, and then by all means, like, pick and choose. And then over time as a company, come up with your own way of working, but it has to be documented. Because it's really especially as you're scaling, it's one thing if you're just a couple of Scrum teams or whatever kind of team, but once you start to scale, if it's not documented, it's chaos.
And you're actually making a really good point here about documenting and having information available for people to refer back to. And it's something related to what we were discussing previously as well. What is your experience with implementing frameworks in, let's say, a small size team or company versus a more established or enterprise level company? Maybe Tristan, you have some input on that topic as well.
Yes, maybe that's a strange approach, but I would say that the smaller the company, the bolder should be the implementation. It's really hard to apply a framework on a large company first, and maybe it's very risky. But in a small company, if you apply to just 1 or 2 person, you have really hard time to evaluate if it's actually working or not. So back to my own experience with BlaBlaCar, which is a pretty small team. We applied a product framework on the product team, which would be probably 60 people, not more. And we really try to apply it straight. So straight doesn't mean, it comes from nowhere and then suddenly overnight you ask everyone to apply it. But it was kind of a pretty fast rollout. So we processed it a lot. We thought about it a lot. Back to the comment that I just heard. Yes, absolutely. Starting with something that you exist is a very important one. I think it's also a sense of humility that, if you want to start from scratch, from nothing, and better than others, hard to believe. So starting with something, then probably you need to develop your craft. It's a bit music. If you want to improvise, you'd better start with like mastering your instrument. If not, then probably it's going to do crazy things. So you start, you apply, you roll it out significantly. So you can have a sense of how it's working and what's not. Then you develop the usage of it. And then probably you can start adapting based on the strategy. Maybe I just want to add thing back to the previous question, which I think is interesting, is a framework is also a tool of influence. So if you're a leader and you see probably some weaknesses or elements that you want to improve in your company, and based also on your capacity and your culture, you can also use it to, double down on one type of activity. If you believe that you're not doing enough research, as an example, maybe the research step or activities will help you to develop that specific muscle. So that's, as you move forward, you can start, playing with your framework, expanding or collapsing so that you adapt your influence. But at the very beginning, I would advise, if there are some startup people in the audience, that you probably shouldn't start too small in a startup, because they will be such a very small number of people that you hardly see the impact you will have.
Thank you, Tristan, for this. That is actually a very useful insight. Chantal, what is your experience when it comes to implementing frameworks?
Yeah, I've worked with a variety of frameworks in different size companies, so scale-up startups, Fortune 500 companies. I think it's really important, whether you're big or small, to experiment, actually. So I'd say if you're a really large company, maybe just take 1 or 2 teams, experiment with a couple of frameworks, see how it goes before rolling it out to everyone. I think what you want is for people to become champions of those frameworks or those tactics, right? So if you get goodness out of a couple of teams, then they become your influencers and your champions of it. And you really want people to be begging to, have the same techniques and tools at their disposal. That's not to say that you would withhold it from anybody else, but I think it's sometimes hard to just, you wouldn't want to step in to a new company and pull the rug out from everybody and say, hey, we're going to be doing this, and that. I think that's crazy talk. I'm actually right now going through a process of doing like a R&D. So all of product and tech at Muse is R&D. We like to keep that innovation spirit alive, but I'm starting to do a journey map to see how our team members are going through the journey of our way of working, what tools they're using, what frameworks they're leveraging or not, so that we can look for those pains and gains and try to help fill the gaps.
Thank you. What's your experience, Leo?
Yeah, so I've done this on both smaller and larger teams at Google, and I think in a small team setting, you talk about, and we actually tried to introduce some sort of framework, which actually didn't make sense. There were just too few people for it to be different than what we were doing normally, and people just found the solutions they needed to solve it. So small teams, I think that's very much aligned with what the startup experience would be. That you just do what works, and until the point where it doesn't work anymore, when it breaks, and that's where you kind of look at, wait, we need to adapt what we're doing. In larger team, it's the kind of opposite, where very much like Chantal is saying, you start with one part of the team or a problem that exists and try to figure out that small part, and then you integrate it slowly into the rest of what you're doing. So it would be my experience with that is that it takes a lot of time, much longer than anything else, and you can't, if you try to force it by setting policies or saying this is how we do it, it doesn't work. It just falls apart. So you need internal motivation, just like with kids. They need internal motivation to do what you want them to do. It's that type of scenario. So yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you very much. Actually, Chantal's point around experimenting triggered a question from our audience, which goes, when you experiment, how do you help companies to avoid water Scrum fall or other, making it work in your context, but limits the original benefit and intent? What's your take on this, Chantal?
Well, that's a really good one. I think it does go back to using the framework the way that it was intended. So I don't think you should experiment within the framework of like moving different pieces or dropping certain ceremonies, etc. If you're new to it, do it the way that it's intended, but experiment then with a variety of frameworks. So let's say you want to start doing opportunity solution tree. Okay, do it the way that it was intended by Teresa Torres. See what you learn from it, and then see if it makes sense to apply it to the other teams as well. But the waterfall, yeah, I mean, it's not gone, is it? Like a lot of these frameworks end up becoming just I don't know. That's a really tricky subject. I don't have all the answers for that. I think every company still struggles with that, to be honest. You got to have the support of leadership, though, to make sure that everyone feels like that psychological safety to be able to do more discovery or whatever else it is. But I'll pass it over to maybe one of my other panelists.
Tristan, Leo, do you have any views on this?
Yeah, I think the kind of the setting the right environment for the framework to work is definitely an important topic. So at the beginning, it's fragile. So I mean, it's very easy to go back to previous habits for many reasons, and you name some of those. So to make sure you have, the right setup for success is also the right environment to welcome your framework. So the culture of your company and the fit with your framework is absolutely critical. If you want to do discovery work in a company that's not at all mature and ready for that, then you have to develop probably a first strategy, which is get your company ready to accept such a framework and make it work. If you try to do both at the same time, meaning you're trying to change the habit of the people and at the same time trying to change the culture of your company, maybe that's a setup for failure, or maybe that's a risky setup, I would say.
If I could just add to that, I think it's really important to have in these instances a strategic framework above everything else that doesn't necessarily sit within R&D or product and tech. Strategic framework like OKRs, right? Some of the frameworks that we talk about, like discovery frameworks, that's not going to work if the teams are not autonomous, and they're going to need something to guide them, and those would be OKRs. But if you don't have that, then probably that's not a good framework for you.
You mentioned the OKRs as an overarching framework that can help guide the others within different divisions or departments or teams. Tristan or Leo, do you have other suggestions for such frameworks?
Overarching frameworks?
Yes.
Is that the question? Yeah. I think OKRs is by far the most common, and the reason it's most common is because it's really, really helpful and really productive, because you clearly state, it's like saying, I want to go on a Saturday, you want to go on a walk, I want to go this distance, and you proclaim it to the whole of the world, right? So you kind of build your commitment towards what you're trying to achieve. Now, the good thing about OKRs is, of course, you have to go back to how it was originally intended and look at, you should have stretch OKRs. They should be, they shouldn't be like focused on having one on everything, because if you rate yourself 100% across everything, you haven't been ambitious enough. So that's something we practice at Google very heavily, that it's okay to miss your OKRs as long as they are, really ambitious one. If they're not ambitious, that's a more bigger problem. So I think OKRs is to be by far the most favorite overarching one. Beyond that, I'm very, really, really passionate about the jobs to be done, which I try to use in every sort of, whenever I want to talk about the user. I mean, are we solving the job that they want to hire us to do? Which I think is a very helpful, quick mental, it fits with my mental framework and the way I like think about it. So that's helpful. The team seems to like it as well, so that's good. So yeah, I think that those are the two kind of achievements. But I would focus on strategic, company controlling or company organizational frameworks before I go into specific elements of the business, like product.
Thank you. What about you, Tristan?
Well, I like using framework for cultural topic. So maybe discovery framework is one of those. It really changes the way we look at things, and it's a deep change. A framework I really like is design for delight. This is an intuitive way to look at things. I had a chance to be working there for some time, and it's what's interesting there, it's profoundly rooted into the Intuit DNA. This is how people think, and so some other interesting things that comes at the surface. It's the deep that comes to the surface, and that's the structure that people should adopt. So I'm a big fan of those type of framework, which is somehow, I would say it's hard to measure the direct impact of it. You can talk about efficiency, but not always, and success, but yes, but sometimes. It's a hard thing to measure, but in terms of cultural impact it has, and the alignment of people. Maybe we haven't talked a lot about this, but it's also a way to create consistency for your company in the way we approach things. So it's a deep impact on the communication between the team, and as soon as we have a common way to look at things, common way to work, then it's facilitated the communication. So there are plenty of advantages that you can get with applying such framework. So I like looking at it through the cultural aspect also.
I think it provides a common language as well, to your point then, yeah.
I was exactly about to make the same comment. I think we're all aligned on this. It's about creating a common understanding and a coherence behind everything we do, right? So you told me about your favorite frameworks. I have another question which comes from the public as well, from Hua Yun, who's asking if you changed any frameworks or ceremonies to adapt to working from home and working remotely.
I think not so much. I think we just do some things async versus sync. Then that's really up to the teams to decide. Some teams that are doing Scrum, they've decided to do their daily stand-ups in Slack. That's up to the team, right? I wouldn't say other than that. I don't think things have changed too much. I think it actually more changes what it means when you're actually all back together again, because now we start with remote first. So if one person is on a laptop because they're not in the room, then we're all on a laptop so that there's no second-class citizens.
Yeah, sorry, Leo, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say it hasn't changed the overall structure of our framework, but probably some activities that are part of the framework. So if I use we have a framework with different steps. One of the steps is the testing activity. And obviously, user test and all the consumer touch point have been like really challenged over the last year. Some creative activity as well. So there's a design part that requires a lot of touch point, and it was so smooth face to face in a room with drawing on the wall and creating that dynamic that I would say that was quite painful. So we haven't changed the overall structure, the step we need to go through, the type of delivery, but the activity has been a bit challenged. And yes, as Chantal said, we try to adapt. We found something, but now it's a new era where it's half back and half not back to the office, which is another setup that honestly I didn't expect. I didn't forecast. There's a whole remote, all there, and now it's half, and it's again one thing we need to figure out for those activities.
Once again, we need to adapt to new ways of working. That's true. I have one final question before we wrap up because we're running out of time. You all mentioned success. What does success of a framework mean to you?
I can take that one. I think it really drives. I think Tristan had a very good point. It drives the culture. You see a change in the culture and the way people think. So it drives commonality among every team member and among teams as well, and then towards the whole company. So I think a good framework has the culture element, it has a structure element, and has an efficiency element. So you kind of look at those three, and are we solving for that? So I think that's what any good framework should have. Sorry, was that a question? Sorry, I actually lost the question. Yes. So yeah, I think that wraps it up.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. I think that's exactly right. It's hard to find metrics for some of these things, right? So, we're playing around with time to value. So especially when you're doing like what we do, dual track agile, and we're focusing more on the outcomes instead of the outputs, and how do you reframe your metrics within that? So time to value is something that we're exploring.
Thank you. What's your case, Tristan, for this?
Yes, everything that's been said, yes, 100%. Maybe one thing that I've noticed, which makes me excited, so I'm not sure this is a success sign, but somehow is when I hear people using our internal vocabulary. And that's one thing we did. We did a lot of changes along the way, and one of those is having our proper naming, proper vocabulary. Even though it's a discovery, we call it slightly differently. It's a strategy, but it becomes our internal vocabulary. And when I hear people saying, oh, we're now on immerse phase, which is kind of a discovery phase, and I hear that and I feel like, oh, now it's their own. And so when you see that framework is owned by the people and that's the way they work, and we don't even know where is the framework coming from, it's our framework, that's, I think, a very interesting success sign.
That's a strong sign of a strong adoption, right? So people
Absolutely.
already speak about it and live it on a day-to-day basis. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it was a great pleasure to have you here with us today. If any of the attendees, you have any further questions for our panelists, feel free to go to Slack, to the Ask the Speaker channel, tag them and ask your questions. They will be happy to respond to you